They say the first rule of the Red Room is simple: if you hear about it, it's already too late. Most people think the Red Room is a myth, a creepy internet story, a modern urban legend designed to scare curious minds away from the darkest corners of the web. But the truth is far more disturbing. The Red Room is not just a place. It's not just a website. It's not even just a ritual. It is a system, a process, a slow, deliberate psychological trap that has followed humanity from ancient times into the digital age. And once it starts, it never stops on its own. This is not a story about hackers or criminals alone. This is a story about human curiosity, and what happens when that curiosity is weaponized. Because the Red Room curse doesn't begin with blood. It begins with attention. A name appears. A screen turns red. And someone, somewhere, realizes they are no longer anonymous. To understand the Red Room, you must forget everything you think you know about it. Because the real danger was never what people claimed happened inside the room. The real danger was what happened after. Long before the internet existed, stories circulated about forbidden rooms. Rooms you were never supposed to enter. Rooms hidden behind locked doors, sealed chambers, or ritual boundaries. In ancient Japan, there were legends of aka no-ma, red rooms used in purification rites and executions. The walls were painted red not for decoration, but to hide the stains. In medieval Europe, secret interrogation chambers were draped in red cloth. Red absorbed the eye, red disoriented the mind, red erased time, and in almost every culture, red carried the same symbolic weight: danger, blood, finality. When modern users claim the Red Room originated online, they're only seeing the latest form of something far older. Because the Red Room didn't need technology to exist. Technology just made it scalable. The first widely known Red Room story appeared in the early 2000s, circulating on Japanese message boards. It described a cursed pop-up window. A child sat alone at a computer. A red screen appeared. A list of names began to scroll. And at the end of the list was the child's own name. According to the legend, anyone who saw their name would die shortly after. But here's what most retellings leave out. There were dozens of versions of the story, different details, different outcomes. Some victims vanished, some committed suicide. Some were found dead under unexplained circumstances. The consistency wasn't in the method. It was in the psychological sequence. First, isolation. Second, fixation. Third, inevitability. Victims didn't panic immediately. They obsessed. They searched. They researched. They tried to disprove it. And with every click, every forum post, every late-night scroll, the idea rooted deeper into their mind. The Red Room curse didn't kill people. People killed themselves trying to escape it. And that distinction changes everything, because it means the Red Room doesn't need to be real in the traditional sense. It only needs to be believed. In 2003, a Japanese animator named Hiroshi Harada created a short animation titled The Red Room. It featured a simple, crude art style, a looping song, a red background. At first glance, it looked amateurish, but viewers reported extreme discomfort. Some couldn't finish it. Others felt watched, and strangely, the animation spread faster than expected. Not because it was shocking, but because it felt wrong. The animation ends with a list of names, and whether intentional or not, it mirrored the urban legend perfectly. From that point on, the Red Room was no longer just a rumor. It had a visual form, and visuals have power. Once something has an image, the brain treats it as real. Neuroscientists call this symbolic encoding. When an abstract fear becomes concrete, it embeds itself deeper into memory. This is why horror films linger, why certain images haunt us for years. The Red Room exploited this perfectly. But the internet did what it always does. It mutated the idea. By the late 2000s, forums began whispering about real Red Rooms on the dark web, live streams, pay-to-watch torture, encrypted access. Most of these claims were fake. scams designed to steal money or credentials. But the myth grew stronger because it was fake. Every debunking created new curiosity. Every denial reinforced the legend, and in some cases, something else happened. Users who went looking didn't find what they expected. They found themselves being watched, targeted ads appearing too quickly, emails referencing searches they never typed, usernames they didn't remember choosing. Paranoia set in, and paranoia is fertile ground. This is where the modern Red Room truly begins. Not with gore, not with violence, but with data, your search history, your habits, your fears. The Red Room doesn't need a physical space. It builds a psychological room around you. Point 1, where the walls are made of suggestions. Point 1, where the lighting is constant anxiety. Point 1, where the exit always feels just out of reach. In documented cases, users who believed they had encountered the Red Room reported similar symptoms: sleep paralysis, auditory hallucinations. A persistent sense of being observed. These are classic signs of stress-induced psychosis. But the trigger wasn't trauma. It was anticipation. Waiting for something terrible to happen is often worse than the event itself. And the Red Room thrives on waiting. There is a reason the name appears at the end of the list. It forces the mind to project forward, to imagine the moment, to rehearse death over and over again. And once the brain accepts an outcome as inevitable, it begins to act accordingly. This is known as self-fulfilling cognition. Belief shapes behavior. Behavior shapes reality. By the time someone reaches out for help, they are already inside the room. And here's the most unsettling part: no one can agree on how the Red Room chooses its victims. Some say it targets the lonely. Others say the curious. Some believe it appears randomly. But patterns do exist. Victims often share one trait: they keep watching. They don't close the tab. They don't turn away. They stay because a part of them wants to know. And the Red Room rewards that desire, not with answers, but with attention. In the next part, we'll break down how the Red Room evolved from a simple legend into a psychological weapon, how online communities unknowingly reinforce it, and why some people claim the curse follows them even after they disconnect. Because the most dangerous thing about the Red Room is not what it shows you. It's what it makes you believe about yourself. The moment people started asking whether the Red Room was real, it stopped being just a story. Because reality doesn't begin with proof. It begins with participation. Every search, every comment, every whispered question on a forum late at night. Has anyone else seen this? That single sentence appears again and again in archived threads, buried in forgotten corners of the internet. It's always written the same way: casual, curious, almost innocent, and it is always followed by silence. The posts stop. The user disappears. The account goes dormant. Skeptics will tell you this means nothing. People lose interest. People move on. But investigators who have tracked these threads notice something unsettling. When the same usernames reappear elsewhere, they don't sound like the same people. Their language changes, shorter sentences, obsessive repetition. A fixation on being watched. The Red Room doesn't need to abduct anyone. It alters them in place. The core of the Red Room curse is a simple psychological mechanism: perceived inevitability. When a person believes an outcome cannot be avoided, the brain shifts into a state of learned helplessness. Decision-making deteriorates. Anxiety spikes. Time perception distorts. Hours feel like minutes. Days feel unreal. Sleep becomes fragmented. Victims begin to live in anticipation rather than in reality, and anticipation is where the Red Room lives. There are no confirmed recordings of a real Red Room livestream, but there are hundreds of verified cases of people who believed they had found one. This distinction matters, because belief alone can destroy a person. In one documented case from South Korea, a university student became convinced he had accessed a Red Room after clicking a corrupted video file shared through a private chat group. The screen didn't show violence. It showed nothing. just a red static background, and a loading bar that never moved. He stared at it for over 3 hours. Later, he reported feeling selected. Within weeks, he dropped out of school. He stopped answering messages. He covered his webcam with tape and refused to use his phone. His final journal entry contained one line: "They already know my name. No crime was ever linked to the incident. No malware was found. Nothing illegal occurred." Yet his life collapsed anyway. The Red Room curse doesn't rely on technology. Technology is just the trigger. What sustains it is the human tendency to search for patterns where none exist. The mind hates randomness. It craves meaning. So when strange coincidences happen after exposure to the Red Room myth, the brain connects them. A power outage. A spam email using your first name. A stranger looking too long on the street. These things happen every day. But once you believe you are being watched, they stop being coincidences. They become confirmation. Online communities unknowingly amplify this effect. Red Room discussion threads often begin with disclaimers. "This is probably fake," but that phrase is more dangerous than belief, because it lowers defenses. Skeptical curiosity is still curiosity, and curiosity keeps you engaged. Users share screenshots. Red-tinted images, corrupted video clips. Most are staged. Some are altered by compression artifacts, color filters, or file errors. But the brain doesn't analyze deeply when fear is involved. It reacts. And reaction is what the Red Room feeds on. There is another layer rarely discussed: control. The Red Room legend gives fear a structure. A list. A sequence. A final moment. For people already struggling with anxiety or depression, this structure can be comforting in a twisted way. It provides certainty. If something terrible is going to happen, at least it makes sense. At least it has rules. This is why some victims don't try to escape. They lean into the belief. They watch more videos, they read more stories, they join private groups. The Red Room becomes their identity, and identity is hard to abandon. Some claim the Red Room adapts to the viewer. Different formats, different languages, different symbols. But the emotional response is always the same. A tightening in the chest. A sense of countdown. The feeling that time is running out. Neurologically, this mirrors the fight or flight response without a physical threat. The body prepares for danger that never arrives. Eventually, the system burns out. Panic attacks, dissociation, depersonalization. Victims describe feeling like they are watching themselves from outside their body. As if they are already gone. And that's the most dangerous phase. Because once a person stops feeling real, consequences lose meaning. This is where the curse becomes lethal. Not through murder, through surrender. There are stories of people claiming they escaped the Red Room, but their descriptions are vague. They say they stopped looking, they deleted accounts, they forced themselves offline, and yet they still speak carefully. As if being too specific might bring it back. Because the Red Room doesn't need access to your computer. It lives in memory. Once an idea reaches a certain depth, it doesn't disappear. It waits. And sometimes it resurfaces years later, triggered by a color, a sound, a loading screen, a moment of silence in front of a glowing monitor. In the next part, we will examine why the Red Room myth thrives in the age of algorithms, how fear becomes profitable, and whether the curse is being deliberately engineered, not by criminals but by systems designed to keep you watching. Because the most unsettling possibility is this: what if the Red Room was never hidden? What if it's always been right in front of you? To understand why the Red Room refuses to disappear, you have to stop thinking about it as a curse and start thinking about it as an environment. An environment doesn't chase you. It surrounds you. The modern internet is not neutral. It watches, measures, predicts. Every pause, every scroll, every second you hesitate before clicking away. Algorithms don't care what you feel, only that you feel something. Fear is efficient. When someone encounters the Red Room myth for the first time, their behavior changes instantly. They slow down. They reread. They rewatch. Engagement spikes. and systems notice, recommendation. Engines begin to respond. More dark content appears. More ominous videos. More stories framed as unexplained, forbidden, or removed. Not because anyone is targeting the individual, but because the system learned what holds their attention. This is how the Red Room becomes personalized. Point 2 People can search the same phrase and receive entirely different results. Point 1 sees debunking articles. The other sees disturbing imagery, low-quality clips, unsettling audio. The second person doesn't realize they are being guided. They believe they are uncovering something hidden. This illusion of discovery is critical. The Red Room doesn't reveal itself all at once. It escalates. First, curiosity, then unease, then obsession. And by the time fear takes over, the path already feels chosen. There is a phenomenon known as algorithmic reinforcement anxiety. It occurs when a person interprets personalized content as external intent. In simpler terms, the internet feels like it's responding to you. For someone already aware of the Red Room myth, this feels like confirmation. You didn't find it found you. This is where the line between fiction and reality dissolves, because something is responding, just not in the way the victim believes. The Red Room doesn't need moderators. It doesn't need a host. It doesn't need a mastermind. It runs automatically. In some cases, content creators unknowingly contribute. Creepy thumbnails. Red tinted visuals, vague titles. What I found at 3:17 a.m. This video wasn't meant to be seen. They told me not to share this. Most are harmless entertainment, but for someone already inside the psychological loop, they feel like signals, like messages, like warnings, and warnings are powerful. They create urgency without clarity. The viewer fills in the gaps with their own fears. This is why the Red Room myth resurfaces every few years. Not because it's revived, but because it's compatible with the system. Fear-based narratives thrive in environments optimized for retention. The longer you stay, the more the environment adapts to you. Some victims describe the sensation as being trained, not consciously, subtly. They begin to expect something terrible at the end of every video. They brace themselves. Heart rate increases before clicking play. The body learns fear faster than the mind, and once learned, it's difficult to unlearn. There is also the matter of anonymity. The Red Room myth relies heavily on the idea of being chosen, that your name appears, that you are singled out. But the modern internet already strips anonymity in invisible ways. IP addresses, device fingerprints, behavioral profiles. Most users don't understand how much can be inferred without ever knowing their name. So when something feels too specific, it triggers paranoia. A username suggestion, an ad using your city, a video uploaded minutes after you search something obscure. None of this is supernatural, but it feels personal, and personal fear cuts deeper. In some extreme cases, individuals attempt to test the Red Room. They challenge it. They dare it to act. This is the most dangerous stage, because confrontation reinforces belief. Every moment that passes without consequence increases tension. They wait for retaliation, and waiting becomes unbearable. Eventually, the mind seeks resolution. Any resolution. This is why some victims describe relief after breakdown. Fear needs an endpoint. If none arrives, the mind creates one. There are therapists who have unknowingly treated Red Room victims. The patients don't use the name. They describe being trapped in a countdown, being watched without proof, feeling like something terrible is scheduled. The treatment is the same: grounding, disruption of patterns, reintroduction of randomness. Because the Red Room only works in a closed loop. Break the loop and the room collapses. But breaking the loop is harder than it sounds, especially when your environment keeps rebuilding it. Late at night, alone, screen glowing, the world shrinks, and the Red Room feels close. In the next part, we will examine the most disturbing claims. Stories of people who say the Red Room followed them offline, how fear reshapes perception in the physical world, and why some insist the curse ends only when you stop waiting. Because the final secret of the Red Room is not hidden online. It's hidden in how the human mind handles silence. The most terrifying stories about the Red Room don't involve screens at all. They begin after the screen goes dark. People assume that fear belongs to the moment of exposure, the video, the image, the myth. But fear doesn't peak there. It migrates. Once the mind accepts the idea of being watched, it doesn't need evidence anymore. It starts producing it. A creaking sound in the hallway, a phone notification that never appears, a shadow that feels slightly out of place. These sensations are not hallucinations in the traditional sense. They are interpretations. The brain is a prediction machine. When it expects danger, it prepares the senses to find it. This is why Red Room victims report similar offline experiences, despite never meeting each other. A sense of presence behind them, a feeling that time is distorted, and an urge to check doors and windows repeatedly. These behaviors form a ritual, and rituals reinforce belief. The Red Room curse thrives on ritual. Checking the screen, refreshing feeds, scanning comments for clues. When people go offline, the ritual doesn't stop. It relocates. They check reflections, they watch the clock, they wait. Waiting is the final stage, because waiting means acceptance. Some claim the Red Room ends when the name appears. Others say it ends with death. But the truth is simpler. The Red Room ends when the person stops waiting for it to end. This is why some victims say the curse followed them for years. They never closed the loop. They kept expecting a conclusion. There is a documented psychological phenomenon called anticipatory dread fixation. It occurs when the mind latches onto a future threat so strongly that the present becomes irrelevant. Life feels paused. The person exists in a holding pattern, and the longer it lasts, the harder it is to return. Some individuals reported a strange moment of clarity, not relief, detachment. They stopped caring whether the Red Room was real, not because they disproved it, but because they were exhausted, and exhaustion breaks the curse. Fear requires energy. Once the body can no longer sustain hypervigilance, the system collapses. This is why Red Room narratives often end quietly. No final message, no dramatic event. Just silence, and silence feels wrong. We expect horror stories to end with impact. But the Red Room dissolves instead. It fades when attention shifts. This is also why attempts to warn others can backfire. Sharing the story spreads the structure, the list, the inevitability, the waiting. Even debunking can recreate the room, because repetition rebuilds the environment. The Red Room does not survive on belief alone. It survives on focus. There are people who insist they escaped by refusing to give it narrative power. They stopped describing it, stopped naming it, stopped imagining the ending. In psychological terms, they removed symbolic reinforcement. No symbol, no room. But not everyone manages this. Some cling to the myth because it explains their fear. Fear without explanation feels chaotic. The Red Room gives it shape, and shape feels safer than randomness. This is the final paradox of the curse. It harms by comforting. It offers meaning where there is none. And meaning is addictive. The most unsettling possibility is not that the Red Room exists. It's that it doesn't need to. Because systems already replicate its effects. Endless scrolling, personalized fear, anticipation without resolution. The Red Room may simply be the first myth that accurately described how modern minds break. Not through violence, but through attention.in. The next part, we will confront the question most people avoid. If the Red Room is a psychological construct, can it be deliberately created? And if so, who benefits from keeping the room alive? If something can be created by accident, it can be recreated on purpose. This is the thought that most discussions about the Red Room quietly avoid, because intent changes everything. Once you remove the supernatural layer, what remains is a blueprint, a repeatable psychological sequence that reliably produces fear, fixation, and withdrawal. And blueprints invite exploitation. The red room does not require advanced technology. It does not require secrecy. It does not require violence. It requires timing, ambiguity, and persistence. The same elements used in interrogation techniques, cult indoctrination, and psychological warfare. Isolation comes first. Not physical isolation, but cognitive isolation. Content that narrows perspective. Language that implies exclusivity. Phrases like "only a few know" or "most people won't understand this." The viewer begins to feel separate from others. Then comes validation. Subtle confirmation that the fear is justified. Not explicit threats, those trigger resistance. Instead, implication. This has happened before. Patterns are emerging. Notice how they all disappear. The mind fills in the rest. Next comes inevitability. A countdown. A list. A sequence that always moves forward. Humans are deeply uncomfortable with unresolved progression. Once a process starts, we feel compelled to see it through. This is known as the Zeigarnik effect. Unfinished narratives create mental tension. The red room weaponizes this tension. It never finishes. This is why some analysts believe the red room myth is an early example of mimetic psychological hacking. A self-propagating idea that uses human cognition as its transmission medium. No central authority required. No single creator. Just a structure that survives because it fits how the brain works. But here is where things become disturbing. In recent years, fear-based engagement has become profitable. Not just in entertainment. Influence. Control. Algorithms reward content that triggers strong emotional reactions. Fear keeps people watching longer than joy. And fear with mystery keeps them watching longest of all. So even without malicious intent, systems naturally favor red room, like dynamics. Ambiguous danger. Personal relevance. Endless escalation. This raises an uncomfortable question. What if the red room is not an anomaly, but a prototype? Some researchers argue that modern attention economies function as distributed psychological pressure systems, not designed to harm, but optimized without regard for mental stability. In such an environment, red rooms are inevitable. They emerge wherever fear, personalization, and narrative converge. Some claim there are modern equivalents, not called red rooms, but functioning the same way. Endless conspiracy cycles, doom-scrolling loops, communities built around anticipation of collapse. The content differs. The structure does not. The red room curse may simply be the most honest version. It doesn't promise salvation. It doesn't offer empowerment. It only offers waiting. And waiting is a powerful leash. There is no need for someone to monitor victims. Self-monitoring is more efficient. Once fear is internalized, the system runs itself. This is why attempts to expose the red room often fail. Exposure still spreads the structure. The room rebuilds in the telling. So how does it end? Not with proof. Not with denial. Those keep the loop alive. It ends with disengagement, with randomness, with the refusal to assign meaning. The red room collapses when attention moves elsewhere. But this is harder than it sounds. Because attention is the currency of the modern world, and currencies are designed to circulate. The final truth is not comforting. The red room is not a place you enter. It is a pattern you fall into. And patterns don't feel dangerous while they are forming. They feel familiar. In the next part, we will dismantle the final layer, the idea of choice, the illusion of agency inside the room, and why the most important decision happens long before anyone believes they've found it. Because the red room doesn't ask for permission. It waits for a moment of weakness. Most people believe the moment of danger is when the red room appears, the red screen, the name, the realization. But that moment is irrelevant. The real decision happens much earlier. It happens when someone chooses not to look away. Choice is a comforting illusion that we like to believe we are in control of what we consume, what we think, what we fear. But the red room doesn't take control. It waits for it to be handed over. A late night. A restless mind. A quiet need for stimulation. The click feels voluntary. It never feels forced. That's the By the time someone wonders whether they should stop, they already feel committed. Because walking away now would mean admitting nothing was there, and that feels worse than fear. The red room exploits cognitive sunk cost. The more time and emotion invested, the harder it is to leave. People don't stay because they're scared. They stay because they've already stayed. This is why many victims describe a strange sense of responsibility as if they owe the experience their attention as if leaving would break some unspoken rule. Inside the red room, agency becomes distorted. You feel watched, yet oddly important, threatened, yet chosen. This contradiction creates psychological tension. The mind resolves it by assigning meaning. If this is happening to me, it must mean something. Meaning is seductive, especially for those who already feel invisible. The red room doesn't target the weak. It attracts the introspective. People who think deeply, who search for patterns, who struggle with unanswered questions. The room offers an answer of sorts, not clarity, but focus. Everything narrows to a single idea. This is why time behaves strangely. Victims report losing hours without realizing it. Not because they were hypnotized, but because attention was compressed. The outside world faded. Inside the room, nothing else mattered. And when attention narrows, identity follows. People begin to describe themselves in relation to the experience. I'm the one who saw it. I'm the one it noticed. I'm already on the list. Once identity attaches, escape becomes painful. Leaving feels like erasing a part of yourself. This is the final lock. The red room doesn't trap people. People anchor themselves to it. Some believe confronting the fear will grant control. They rewatch. They analyze frames. They search for hidden messages. But analysis doesn't weaken the room. It strengthens it. Because the room is not built from content, it's built from attention. And attention is energy. The only people who truly exit describe the same process. They didn't defeat it. They abandoned it. They stopped narrating it in their mind, stopped replaying the moment, stopped waiting for something to happen. They accepted uncertainty, and uncertainty starves the room. This is the final truth most stories never say out loud. The red room ends the moment it stops being interesting. Not when it's disproven. Not when it's explained. But when it's ignored. Fear wants an audience. Without one, it dissolves. Yet this is difficult in a world designed to pull you back. Notifications, recommendations, reminders of what you almost watched. The system doesn't want resolution. It wants return. This is why the red room feels endless. Not because it is powerful, but because attention rarely rests. So if there is a curse, it isn't it isn't digital. It's the inability to let silence remain empty. The need to fill it with meaning, with danger, with something watching. The red room never follows you. You carry it, and the moment you stop carrying it, there is no room left to enter. There is a strange moment that happens after fear loses its grip. Not relief, not victory, quiet confusion. People expect the end of the red room to feel dramatic, like waking from a nightmare, heart racing, breath sharp. Instead, it feels anticlimactic, almost empty. The room doesn't collapse with noise. It simply stops being there. And that absence is unsettling, because the red room filled space. Mental space. Emotional space. When it's gone, something remains unoccupied. Silence. For some, that silence is unbearable. They return. Not because they believe again, but because they miss the structure. Fear gives days shape. Waiting gives time direction. Without it, everything feels flat. This is why some people revisit the myth years later. They tell themselves they're immune now, that they're just curious. But curiosity was never the entry point. Loneliness was. The red room is often mistaken for a horror story. It isn't. It's a coping mechanism gone wrong, a way for the mind to organize anxiety into a narrative. Better a named threat than a formless one, better a curse than randomness. I end this way. The Red Room reveals more about us than about danger. We don't fear being watched, we fear being unseen. The idea that something noticed us, even something hostile, is oddly comforting. It confirms existence. This is why victims sometimes describe a sense of loss after leaving. The room gave them purpose, a countdown, a role. Without it, they must face something harder, an open future, an undefined self. This is also why attempts to eradicate the Red Room myth always fail. You can't delete a coping mechanism. You can only replace it, and replacement requires something more compelling, something that offers meaning without fear. The Red Room survives because it asks nothing, no belief system, no effort, no change. Just attention, and attention is easy to give, harder to reclaim. Some experts believe the next evolution of fear won't look like horror at all, no red screens, no lists, no ominous names. Just gentle nudges, subtle personalization, a slow narrowing of reality until only one narrative remains. The Red Room was loud by comparison, obvious. Crude. It taught us what fear looks like when it has edges. What comes next may not be so visible. This is why the most important lesson of the Red Room has nothing to do with the dark WB. It has to do with presence. Being where you are. Allowing boredom. Allowing silence. Allowing unanswered questions. Fear cannot survive there. It needs motion. It needs anticipation. It needs you leaning forward. The Red Room waits for that lean, that small surrender, and it always will. Not because it's alive, but because human attention is restless. So if this story lingers, if it echoes a little longer than expected, that doesn't mean the room is opening. It means you notice the mechanism, and noticing is the first step out. There is no final warning, no closing door, only this. Nothing is waiting for you. And that is not a threat. It is freedom. After the Red Room fades, something subtle happens. People don't talk about it much, because it doesn't sound dramatic enough to matter. Their perception changes. Not in a mystical way, in a practical one, that they become aware of how easily attention drifts. How quickly the mind reaches for stimulation when silence appears. The Red Room leaves behind a kind of scar. Not fear, but awareness. Once you've seen how a narrative can trap you, you start noticing similar structures everywhere. Endless outrage. Cycles. Predictions that never resolve. Content designed to keep you just anxious enough to stay. The Red Room was only one story. The mechanism is everywhere. This realization is uncomfortable, because it removes the villain. There is no shadowy group. No hidden room. No final revelation. Just systems responding to behavior, and behavior responding to systems. A loop. Some people want the Red Room to be real in a physical sense. A place you can point to. A server you can shut down. A door you can lock. Because concrete threats are easier to fight. Abstract ones require discipline. They require saying no to things that feel interesting. They require tolerating boredom. They require stopping before curiosity turns into compulsion. This is why the Red Room feels ancient. Not because it existed for centuries, but because it exploits something ancient. The human tendency to stare at the unknown until it stares back. In earlier times, this took different forms. Omens, curses, prophecies, stories that organized. Uncertainty. The Red Room is simply the digital descendant. And like all such stories, it reflects the fears of its era. Fear of surveillance. Fear of exposure. Fear that individuality is an illusion. Fear that we are more predictable than we want to believe. What unsettles people most is not the idea that someone is watching. It's the idea that no one needs to. That patterns alone are enough. That behavior reveals more than intention. This is why the Red Room never announces itself clearly. Certainty would break the spell. It stays half-formed. Always just enough to keep the mind engaged. And engagement is the point. Those who truly move on don't feel triumphant. They feel lighter. Not because something ended, but because they stopped carrying it. They don't avoid the topic. They just don't linger. The red room loses power the moment it stops being special. When it becomes just another story, point one among many, and no longer a destination and no longer a threat. Just a mirror. If this narrative feels unfinished, that is intentional. Because the red room never ended for anyone who waited for a conclusion. It ended for those who stopped asking for one. There is nothing hidden behind the screen. No final list. No moment of selection. Only the quiet fact that attention is finite, and whatever you give it to will grow. The red room grows in darkness, but it dies in daylight. Not exposure, not confrontation. Just ordinary life continuing without it. And that is the most unsettling ending of all. Because it means the door was never locked. You were never trapped. You were just looking too long. There is a moment when a story stops asking for your attention. Not because it finished, but because you did. The red room doesn't announce this moment. It passes quietly, almost unnoticed. Point one day, you realize you haven't thought about it. No deliberate choice. No effort. Just absence. And absence is powerful. Because fear depends on continuity. It needs to be refreshed, revisited, remembered. Left alone, it weakens. What remains after? The red room is not insight, but space, mental space. The kind that feels strange at first, because it isn't filled with urgency, no countdown, no anticipation. Just time moving forward without direction. This is where many people stumble. They mistake calm for emptiness. They reach back, scroll again, search again, trying to recreate the feeling, but the room doesn't fully return. Once the mechanism is seen, it cannot unsee itself. It still functions, but it no longer convinces. This is the difference between fear and awareness. Fear narrows. Awareness expands. The red room thrives in narrow spaces, late hours, small screens, private spirals. Awareness widens perspective. It reconnects the present moment to the body, to the room you're actually in. The chair, the light, the quiet. These details were always there. They were just overshadowed. Some people describe this phase as disappointing. They expected something more. A final answer. A secret revealed. But the red room never held secrets. It held attention, and once attention leaves, there is nothing left to reveal. This is the final inversion. The red room feels important only while it is watched. Ignored, it becomes irrelevant. Not defeated, just ordinary. This is why telling others rarely works. You can't remove someone from a room they don't believe they're in. They have to notice the walls themselves, and noticing happens in silence. Not explanation, not warning. Just distance. The red room is not a cautionary tale. It is a reflection of how easily the mind trades freedom for stimulation. How quickly curiosity becomes obligation. How stories become environments, and environments become identities. Leaving doesn't require strength. It requires disinterest, which is much harder, because disinterest feels like loss. But what is lost was never real, only the time spent staring. There is no aftermath. No scar. Just the faint realization that nothing followed you. Nothing noticed. Nothing waited. And that realization is unsettling in its own way. Because it means fear was never external. It was generated. Maintained. Sustained. By attention alone. The red room didn't watch you. You watched it, and eventually, you stopped. At the very end, nothing happens, and that is the hardest part to accept. There is no final image burned into memory, no closing sentence that explains everything, no moment where fear transforms into revelation. Life simply resumes. Screens turn off. Rooms return to their normal shape. Time moves forward without acknowledging what you expected. This feels wrong. Stories are supposed to end with meaning. But the red room never cared about meaning. It only cared about duration. How long you stayed. how long you waited, how long you let the idea occupy space. When that occupation ends, the room dissolves so completely that it's difficult to believe it was ever there. And yet, traces remain. Not of fear, of understanding. You begin to notice how often narratives try to hold you in place. How frequently tension is stretched but never resolved. How anticipation is used as currency. Once you notice this, something changes. You don't rush as easily. You don't lean forward as often. You don't wait for endings that never come. The red room becomes a reference point. Not a threat, but a reminder that attention is not neutral. That what you focus on grows, regardless of truth. That fear does not need reality to survive, only repetition. This is why the red room feels endless to those inside it, and brief to those who leave. From the outside, it's difficult to explain why it mattered. It sounds trivial. A story, a screen, a color. But from the inside, it felt total. This is how environments work. They feel infinite until you step out. Then they shrink instantly. The red room shrinks the moment it is no longer framed as special. No longer framed as forbidden. No longer framed as inevitable. It becomes background noise. And background noise fades. If there is any warning at all, it is this: pay attention to what asks for your attention. Not everything that feels urgent is important. Not everything that feels personal is intentional. Not everything that feels watched is alive. Sometimes, it is just a system doing what systems do. Responding, reflecting, repeating. The red room was never an enemy. It was a lesson disguised as fear. And like most lessons, it ends quietly. No applause, no closure, no signal that it's over. Just a moment where you realize you're thinking about something else. And in that moment, the room no longer exists. Eventually, the story stops reaching for you. Not because it was resolved, but because you are no longer holding it. There is no signal when this happens. No warning, no moment you can point to and say, this is when it ended. It simply loosens its grip. Thoughts drift elsewhere. The screen becomes just a screen. The silence stops feeling charged. What once felt heavy now feels distant, almost irrelevant. And that realization arrives without emotion. No fear, no relief. Just neutrality. The red room doesn't leave behind a scar. It leaves behind perspective and understanding of how easily attention becomes a doorway. How quickly curiosity turns into confinement. How stories grow walls when we stay inside them too long. Nothing followed you. Nothing watched. Nothing waited for your name to appear. There was never a list. Only time spent looking. And when looking stops, there is nothing left to see. The world continues exactly as it did before. Unchanged. Unimpressed. Cars pass. Lights flicker. Hours move forward, without ceremony. And somewhere in that ordinary movement, the idea loses its shape. It no longer feels mysterious. It no longer feels dangerous. It no longer feels important. Just another thought that passed through and didn't stay. If you try to remember the room now, it feels smaller than it did before. Like recalling a dream that once felt enormous, but collapses the moment you describe it. Details blur. Edges soften, and eventually, even the color fades. There is nothing hidden behind the screen. Nothing. Waiting in the dark. Only attention moving on to something else. And when it does, there is no room left. Only quiet. And quiet does not mean something is about to happen. It simply means nothing is.